well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with SolarPVTraining.com. And as per normal, what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and go through the news of the week. Then going to try and hit any of the webinars or upcoming conferences that deal in the solar industry that have crossed my desk. And this is an interactive platform, so we have folks who join us here online. And so hopefully they'll jump in, interrupt, and have ideas or things they'd like to share as we go forward. And then we go into a deep dive on a topic. This time it's going to be are solar panels really toxic? And the reason why I brought that up is a number of folks have sort of approached me about toxicity issues of solar panels. They're just convinced that these things are going to lead to some sort of problem. And so I thought, you know what, rather than just dismiss that and say, you know, this is just propaganda from folks who are trying to dismiss solar as an option, you know, let's look at it. Let's look at it. Is it really an issue? Is it a problem? So that's what I did. That's what I'm going to share, and we'll see how that turns out. So this is the solar news from the week of April 7th through the 13th of 2024, the day after the great eclipse in our area. Okay, so the Institute of Local Self-Reliance issued their annual scorecard on states' rules and regulations regarding accessibility to renewable energy. And more than half of all of the states failed this year, and the rest of them didn't do so great either. So only Illinois, well, I'll back up on this. What they're doing is they're grading based on policies and procedures that have been adopted by the state on things such as net metering policy, access to community solar, ease of interconnections, the rules that are revolve around third-party ownership of solar, things like that. There are quite a number of different rubrics that they're looking into. And out of the 50 states in the District of Columbia, only Illinois got a B. Nobody got an A on this test this time. 11 of the states got C's. In the report, they said they were average. Well, how can you be average when only that, you know, that's the top? Okay, 13 got D's and 26 of them failed. Now, this is demonstrating, at least to me, unless they change their way of measuring, a significant step back, because when I looked up the 2023 report card, in that report card, they had 4 of the states that had an A. 14 of them had been rated as a B, 6 is a C, 14 is a D, and only 13 had failed. So we are seeing a walk back in a lot of these states, sort of the pushback against renewable energy. Increasingly severe weather is affecting the expansion of solar. We saw in March a dramatic hailstorm that damaged thousands of panels down at the Fighting Jay Solar Farm, which is located in St. Ben County, Texas. On March 15th, it got hit by a storm that dropped like golf ball size hail there on these panels. There's some interesting online video if you want to look at those about flyovers showing all of the damaged panels. And this was one of the things that got me thinking about toxicity, because a lot of the local residents were saying, see, these panels are damaged. They're going to be leaching arsenic and cadmium into the groundwater, and this is going to cause a lot of problems. We'll find out. So the damage from panels is costing the industry about $2.5 billion each and every year. About half, or 55% of all of the insurance claims, are for hail damage within solar fields. And each of these claims for these utility size systems generally average about $58.4 million per claim. So this is big money. What the developers are starting to do, most of these are on tracking systems. So they've got these systems now set that as severe weather approaches, they'll turn the panels vertical into stow mode, and that will then avoid a lot of these hail damage. It's not going to avoid all, but it will have a significant impact. But of course, you've got to have enough warning on these storms to actually move the panels into stow mode. The US median solar module price declined 31% over the past year. This was reported by ANZA, and ANZA is a procurement company for solar and battery technologies. The price fell from about 40 cents a watt in March of 2023 down to just under 28 cents a watt in February of this year. The falling prices are the result of a worldwide glut of solar panels. China continues to dramatically expand its production capacity, and they account for about 85% of the growth of solar panel manufacturing capacity. At the same time, other nations like the United States are trying to develop their domestic supply chain. And so that's happening at the same time. China is expanding their capacity. And as a result, we're seeing that production is far outpacing the demand on these solar panels. Now, I did get an email on this particular item where someone said, how come I'm not seeing the price of solar panels decline? I was looking at Amazon. Well, Amazon's not really the place to go on these kind of pricing structures. And we're really, for the most part, talking about large panels that are procured through the traditional solar wholesale process. So don't assume a 100-watt panel is going to go down in price just because the wholesale price for 500-watt panels at a utility level are declining. There's an old saying that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, but apparently that's not necessarily true. There was a recent report from a company, and I have trouble saying this word. It's Eoltech. It sounds Norwegian. Eoltech. It's a solar and wind assessment company. And what they did is they studied about 300 different sites over a period of 15 years. And this represents about 80% of all of the onshore wind capacity worldwide. So pretty significant study on this. What they did is they found that from year to year, the production may vary significantly at a specific turbine or at a specific site by as much as 25%. But when you amalgamate everything, the total production from wind only varies slightly in a range plus or minus 3%. So the wind apparently does always blow. And we find the same thing with solar. The variations when you amalgamate everything is quite slight. Unless you have an eclipse that comes right through the middle of it. So that's, and grid officials estimated, speaking of the eclipse, I couldn't pass this up because I've got eclipse on my mind here, that they were anticipating it would reduce solar power output across the US by as much as 30 gigawatts. That's the equivalent of turning off about 30 nuclear power stations during that day. That even though the totality of the eclipse only lasts for about 4 minutes, you see that there's a reduction of solar gain over a period of about 3.5 hours. And that extends not just where the line of totality is, but it extends far beyond that over a significant portion of the country. So they were estimating that as much as 71% of the solar power would be lost during that time period, 3.5-hour time period, in the East, 45% in the West, and about 93% in Texas. So they really thought this was going to have some significant impact. Although, put that in perspective, it was mitigated because a lot of the pathway was cloudy. So clouds have a much more significant impact on solar gain throughout the day than a silly little thing like the eclipse. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. I'll throw it open and see if anybody has anything they want to add into that here at this moment. Anything that crossed your desk or ideas? Give you just a second to jump on in. Raise your hand or shout out. As you're thinking about that, I'll jump into some of the upcoming events or announcements. And again, feel free to jump in and interrupt me as I go forward. There is a upcoming conference or webinar here on April 16th. On managing data through AI on larger systems. That's April 16th at 2 p.m. And I should mention here again that I'm not going to give you the links or anything like that, just making you aware these exist and you can run out and find them yourself. So not your mother, right? Okay, so April 23rd, 1 p.m. There's a webinar here about the importance of doing environmental assessments early on in the solar process. That's going to be 1 p.m. Eastern time. All these times are Eastern. April 23rd, 2 p.m., Solus Hybrid Inverter System. So there's going to be one through Solar Builder there. And the 24th at 2 p.m. on solar tracking projects. Then on the 25th, dealing with post-sale workflows, 2 p.m. This is through Solar Power World. The ACES conference going to be in Washington, D.C., the week of May 20th through the 23rd. And that's at the George Washington University in DC. See you there if you're going to show up. And then there's the June 12th through the 13th, there's a Solar and Storage Summit in San Francisco, California. And as per normal, on solarpvtraining.com, we have online courses that are available. We have face-to-face courses that are available. So jump in there and see what we've got coming up. In fact, as soon as this call's over, I got to drive down to Eastern West Virginia Community College, and we're going to be doing a course there the next 2 days. All right, so I'll give you guys just a shot here to jump in before I get into our topic. Anybody have anything they want to add in or an item that you'd like to bring up for discussion during this session? Just a second. I tell you, the more people we get on here, the shyer everybody is. So, All right. So the question du jour here is basically legitimately and seriously, are solar panels toxic? So I'll try and give you my perspective on it, and perhaps somebody has different perspectives or other issues that they can see with some of this. I think a lot of it is really public perception. And you'll also see that some of it is, I think we worry about things we shouldn't worry about and ignore things we should worry about. So this hailstorm, as I mentioned in the news, there's a lot of folks who get up in arms. Oh, look, see, these things are going to be leaching these toxic chemicals into the groundwater and And a lot of this is really focused on the utility scale solar. There's a big pushback going on. It's highly organized. The no solar on prime farmland argument. And I must say, when I was driving around through central and northern Ohio yesterday to see the eclipse, there's a lot of solar out there, seeing fields and fields of solar. So it's quite a visible thing, and it's a new thing, and I can see it's disruptive to people. So there's going to be a bit of pushback, not nearly as much as corn, but still a lot of solar. So there's some protests here. I think this is. I think I might have my slides slightly out of order. Yeah, here I wanted to just kind of show you. This is a publication coming from the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. So this is the kind of information that's being put out there to farmers, and it's not inaccurate, but again, it's slightly misleading, I think. Said this particular one says, well, it's important to remember that some types and brands of solar panels are hazardous waste, while others are not. Well, we'll get into what kind of proportion those are. But basically what they're talking about is silicon panels. The vast majority of solar panels are not considered hazardous. But when you get into some of these cadmium telluride, they're the thin films, they do contain cadmium, and that is considered a toxic. Others do contain some parts arsenic. So that's an issue. So they're just saying that these do contain cadmium. The gallium arsenide, these do contain arsenic. Some of the older solar panels, well, you're not going to find those out in the fields, but some of them do have some coatings, and some of the newer SIGs, copper, selenium. I mean, shoot, you add copper and selenium to the soil. So I'm not quite sure what they're looking about there, but anyway, I think the cadmium and the arsenic, legitimate concerns. And that's the kind of information that they're getting there. But then if we look at for instance, this is on prime farmland where they have no hesitation of spraying Roundup into the soil, so and you'll find that these particular herbicides and fertilizers and the like contribute a significant amount of cadmium and arsenic to the soil intentionally. So once again, I'll backtrack on this, but they're talking about spraying this stuff in like a pound per acre, as opposed to getting trace amounts from a solar panel if it's damaged, leaching into the environment, which is highly unlikely but possible. So let's put some of these things into perspectives. So what are some of the cited effects of exposure to Roundup? Well, asthma, burns, diarrhea, eye irritation, nausea, respiration, vomiting, cancer, nervous system disorders. I just find it interesting that the same people who can straight face sit there and argue that solar panels are a threat to the prime farmland are happy to just spray massive amounts of these amazingly carcinogenic toxins into the ground and be perfectly comfortable with that. And we did a session on the whole prime farmland. So I'm not going to get into the fact that a significant portion of the corn that's being grown is dealing with ethanol. I think, hopefully we realize this is not anti-M growing potatoes, or tomatoes, in Kansas. This is a highly industrialized process as it exists. So I just think that the prime crop is probably hypocrisy. Okay, so what are these modules actually made of? Well, if we talk about silicon as a fairly inert, fairly benign construction material, and about 95% of all of the solar panels that are out there are going to be silicon-based solar panels. So of the materials in these solar modules, not all of it is silicon, of course, and glass is the primary component, which is made up of silicon. There's a polymer coating on most of these, similar to what you would find in tempered glass coatings on your windows. Aluminum, the aluminum frame, pure silicon, copper, silver, a few other trace elements. So I think most people will consider that a silicon solar panel is fairly benign. In fact, silicon is the second most common element on the planet. So it's not something that's typically not within those fields. So that's the silicon there. Another issue is that comes up in these discussions is, okay, that's fine, but what about at the end of its life? It's causing a lot of pollution issues. It's going to cause tremendous amounts. So I found this interesting little estimation here on the waste stream from Climate News, where if you really are worried about, significant end of life waste stream here, municipal waste, when we talk about millions of metric tons in this time frame, 2016 to 2050, it's huge amounts. And coal ash, huge amounts of coal ash from these burning of the coal. Plastic waste, a lot. Electronic waste, oil sludge. Then you get down into solar panels, and this 160 metric tons of solar panels at the end of that life by 2050 assumes no recycling. It's a worst case scenario. So I guess the theme as we go through this, at least in my mind, is these concerns are legitimate. We should try and do the best we can, but compared to what is the norm, solar is already pretty good. We should be better, but we should be better in every case, in every one of these levels. So to focus on solar or to focus on wind, that's just, that's holding those industries to a higher standard than you're holding any other industry to. Here's another little quote there about solar developers. should be responsible for decommissioning. They typically are. So at the end of this life, these things are typically going to be written into the contract. So I think they're creating a problem that legitimately might exist in this concept of what about at the end of the life, but we're probably not going to be facing with that magnitude. Already there are responsible parties. Already we're moving towards the recycling. They have to post bonds, things of that nature. You don't hear the same thing when somebody makes you know, I don't know, makes a parking lot. You know, what about the end of its life? How are we dealing with this? You know, when somebody builds a Walmart, what about the end of its life? How are we dealing with that? So not a bad concern. We should maybe put that into everything we do, but let's not just focus on solar. So what are the main types? Here, I'll just take a breath here. I see some things popping up in chat. Anybody want to throw a comment in here while I'm taking a break? Mike, you got something there? I saw your name just pop up. All right, so what are the main types of thin film panels? And again, the 5%, this is the 5% that are the issue. There's amorphous silicon, there's cadmium telluride, there's copper, they just call it SIGs, right? Copper, indium, gallium, selenide, or anyway, SIGs. So figure that those that last 5% are broken into thirds. Now, amorphous silicon is really just silicon under another name. It's flexible silicon. The same issues dealing with silicon are going to be in with the amorphous silicon. So I think we could safely dismiss that one as one of the problem children when you're talking about some people's concerns with solar panels. So really, the primary one that folks focus on, at least from the literature I'm seeing, is the cadmium telluride. And that is made popular by First Solar, which is located up in Toledo, Ohio. They're certainly the most popular of the thin film manufacturers. These guys are being used in a lot of these utility scale systems. So this is the one I would focus on if I were gonna be picking on somebody. So this one does contain cadmium, and we'll touch on some of that. And then the SIGs also has cadmium as part of it. They all have a little bit of arsenic in them, and the arsenic is the doping material within the different layers, just to make them the transfer of electrons easier between the layers. Those are in very trace amounts. All right, so is the cadmium going to be an issue? Well, first off, you need to understand cadmium's already in a lot of things. I just picked this particular paint. It's in paint. It's in batteries. There's some other more common things that we'll touch on. But for the most part, it is encapsulated within the glass. So the technical papers that I was looking through, and I'll confess I didn't read them totally because they're boring, but they're basically saying these things are encapsulated within the silicon, within the glass. They're not water soluble, so you would have to basically grind up the solar panel, perhaps put it into a landfill, because normal wear and tear, these things are not going to leach out into the environment. And even in a landfill situation, they probably won't, but I guess theoretically it's possible. So if you do consume large amounts, you're going to get similar reaction to consuming or being exposed to Ready Roundup. You're going to have breathing issues, stomach issues. There's kidney. I'll tell you, the biggest exposure people have to cadmium are from cigarette smoke, specifically when you're smoking, but also secondhand smoke is a big issue. I think that the next leading cause of exposure to cadmium is coal burning power plants. So once again, these protests were not out there around coal, but they are around solar, which tends to make you feel like the issue is not so much cadmium. It's a different issue that's being expressed. So the cigarette smoking, secondhand smoke, manufacturing processes, the folks who are really exposed to these things are the ones working in the factory. So that is a health and safety issue for those folks. So manufacturing of batteries, welding, soldering, mining, the mining operations, you're exposed to quite a lot of them. Some natural cadmium is absorbed into the plant, so it's present in some plants to a certain level. But actually, coal power plants and fertilizers are a huge source of cadmium in the environment. And I think most of the expressed concerns that I saw had to deal with cadmium that's in the water supply. So that would be really from fertilizers primarily. When we here, I found this one. This was from a study that was done. Phosphate fertilizers are far and away the largest source of cadmium in the environment. Fossil fuel combustion is second largest. Iron and steel production, then natural sources, cement production, incineration. Really, second to last are going to be cadmium type products, such as solar panels. They would fall into that. So again, 1/20th of the amount of cadmium in the environment that you get just from fertilizers being spread on this prime farmland that we're so worried about. Then we have the risks of arsenic. Arsenic is definitely one that we should be concerned about. It is contained. I think this is one that gets people worried because, arsenic and old lace, and everybody knows arsenic is a poison. So if it is in fact present in the solar panels, which it is in very trace amounts, if it was able to be leached out, it would cause a problem. So how are people exposed to arsenic? Once again, prime culprit, smoking. Smoking is the number one source. Pressure treated wood has arsenic in it. That's a problem. I know that they've changed some of the rules around the manufacture of pressure treated wood, but all those old playgrounds with all the pressure treated wood has arsenic in it. And in the manufacturing process of glass, of semiconductors, of ammunition, all of these release amounts of arsenic. And coal power plants and fertilizers, once again, major sources of arsenic in the environment. Go way, 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 way down the list before you start getting to something like solar panels. It's just not. Probably pane glass from windows is a significantly larger source of arsenic than solar panels are. So let's see. Here's the one I was looking about: exposure during manufacturing and disposal. Because once again, I think if somebody raises this as an issue, it's fair to say that in normal operations of a solar panel, there's zero, vanishingly small risk of any of the chemicals that are contained within the solar panel leaching out or being emitted into the environment. It's only during the creation of the panel and the destruction of the panel that this risk of release into the greater environment is present. So during manufacturing, they said that typically a coal power plant is going to release about 2 grams of cadmium into the environment for every gigawatt hour of production, compared with 0.016 grams for every gigawatt hour attributed to solar modules. So a significant small amount. And actually, if you dig into those numbers, a significant portion of that cadmium they've allocated to the cost of the energy to produce it, and that energy is coming from fossil fuel plants. So it's not encapsulated within the solar panel, it's just being released by coal power plants during their manufacture. So they're just simply taking responsibility for that little portion. Under the First Solar, who is the target of a lot of this, they did a big study, and the study is pretty interesting, but I took it with a bit of a grain of salt because these guys are trying to promote their product in the best light. But they're saying essentially almost all of the material in this panel can indeed be recycled. First Solar does have a program that at the end of the life, you can return that panel back to the manufacturer and they will recycle that panel. So if you're saying that First Solar is the major source of this toxicity, they already have a process where those toxins, if any, in those panels are going to be recaptured and reused because that program is already in existence. It's crystalline, and as I mentioned, if left to its own devices, it's not water soluble, and it's also very resistant to high heat. So you're not going to see that released into the environment realistically. Thin film panel, they're saying that if you figure for every panel, there's about 10 grams of cadmium incorporated or encapsulated into this through the manufacturing process. As I mentioned, a lot of this is by burning fossil fuels to make it, but there is a certain amount of it encapsulated within that panel. Compare that with fertilizer. The fertilizer I found, the standard fertilizer that's used on farms, 33 milligrams per kilogram of cadmium in the fertilizer, an average of using about 90 kilograms per acre. So what I'm saying is that typically there's about 3 grams of cadmium in the fertilizing process per acre that is specifically and purposefully put on these farms. The 10 grams is, let's say half of that is not part of the manufacturing process. So let's say there's 5 or 6. So every 2 years, they're basically grinding up and putting a solar panel into the soil as it is. So once again, I would just say the primary culprit for this kind of groundwater destruction is the fertilizing and insecticide that is purposefully put into the soil of these farms. It's not coming from solar panels. It's just not. And then I just thought I'd throw in some statistics here just because I felt like it. For the things we focus on that we think are fearful. The idea that you might be eaten by a shark, 300 million to 1, how many people, I'm not going to swim in the ocean because I might get attacked, is actually less than getting hit on the head and killed by a coconut falling from a tree. So don't be worrying about the sharks, right? The coconut falling. And I just thought it was funny because the odds, if you were randomly selected to be president of the United States, are like 152 million to 1. So it's twice as much. It's twice as likely you'll be president than it is you'll be eaten by a shark. And that's if you don't run. Airplane death, 1 in 11 million. Getting hit by lightning, about 1 in 10 million. Being killed by a terrorist attack is like 9 million and something to 1. Which snake bites, 3.5 million. Falling off a ladder, 2.3 million to 1. Dying in a bathtub, you're a lot more likely to die in your bathtub than to be killed by a terrorist for sure. Then you start being road accident, and then 2 to 1, 2.5 to 1 that you're going to die of a stroke or a heart attack. So basically, a lot more risk of eating a McDonald's than there is being killed by a terrorist. So, and the whole point of that was basically to say, yes, solar panels do present a certain amount of environmental risk, but compared to what? These still are the best alternative. It's like people say, yes, people die in airplane crashes, but it is still the safest form of transportation by a long ways. So let's try and put that in perspective. I don't think we're going to convince anybody who doesn't want to be convinced, but I'm just saying that in this case, the research I did found, yeah, there is toxicity involved in this process, but it is minimal, and it is we're attempting to address it. So Does anybody have any comments or anything to share on this particular topic? Anything you want to throw in there?
Did you touch on perovskite?
Perovskite? No, I didn't. And actually, perovskite is not considered a toxic
Oh, good.
process. Yeah, it's
I
a
have no idea what it
crystalline.
is.
Yeah, it's a crystalline structure, a lot like silicon. Perovskite is actually like a group of materials. It's not a specific material. Sort of like if I were to say crystals, crystalline. So, but it's not considered toxic. Anybody else? I saw Ted, your name had popped up there a second ago.
Yeah. Hey, Jay, you mentioned before that there's probably the industry suffers about $2.5 billion of nature-related, disaster-related damage to solar panels each year. Could you, I don't know if you know that. Have you ever seen anything of, simple statistics that represents, 1.5 million solar panels each year that have to go into I just made that up. I have no idea what the math is. Probably bigger than that, but that gives you kind of the magnitude of the recycling load that's going to have to be done at the end of the waste stream. Have you done anything like that?
Yeah, we actually touched on it a little in a different episode of this, but yeah, the $2.5 billion doesn't just represent damage; it represents underperformance for a variety of reasons, whether the panels are shorting out, whether they're damaged, but a significant portion of it is damage. I personally, when I was dealing with a utility scale installation, was kind of amazed at the number of solar panels in these installations that arrive on site damaged, that are damaged through handling. They're, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of solar panels being shipped in. And these yahoos are driving forklifts into them and dropping them off trucks. And so you get piles and piles of these damaged solar panels. So we've often been thinking about the end of life as something 20 years into the future on a lot of these panels, but there's a significant portion where end of life is right now. And how are we going to deal with that? Currently, there's no good solution. There's a lot of discussion about we're going to be recycling these things and we're setting up recycling centers. And if you buy them from specific manufacturers who have these, you can ship them back, but it's usually shipping them back at your expense. And so when we were looking at this particular installation, to recycle these panels was going to cost around $10,000 just for this stack of panels. Not something that the operator particularly wanted to pay. The ease of just loading them into a dump truck and taking them to the dump at a cost of $400 or $500, you can sit there and figure out which one they're going to end up choosing. So what I'm trying to do in my own little way here is I'm trying to set up an experiment. We actually salvaged about 125 of these damaged panels, and the panel damage is mostly interior. They're not, the ones we salvaged are not damaged on the outside. Like if you run your hand over the shattered glass, you can't feel it. It's shattered inside somewhere. So we want to see just what percentage of production is lost. So we're going to run an experiment with side by side with real, undamaged panels and damaged panels, and over time see what the production is going to be like. And if it's 90%, if it's 95%, or if it's 2%, we just don't know. But if it is 90%, then it seems to me there's a secondary market for these panels. Where we can take, not all of them, because some of them have holes in them and they're just a mess, but we can take a significant number of these panels and reuse them, where aesthetics is just not an issue. And it just seems to me there's a lot of folks out there who would love to get panels for free or next to free, that are slightly blemished, not so concerned about that, but they're still going to produce electricity. So that's a project. So if you're a funder out there who has a few $1,000s they want to throw at something like that, let me know, because I want to do that experiment and just see, because it's going to be hundreds of thousands of panels, but who knows, billions of dollars, I assume, happening right now. Any other comments? All right, well, hearing none, we'll call it a day here for this one, and we'll see you guys all next week, all right? Take care, bye-bye.